What's going on, everybody? Dan Z here with another edition of Uncontrolled Narrative. And to be honest with you, I really wanted to avoid talking about Shedeur Sanders, at least for like a few episodes, right? Like we're in the off season. Can we stop talking about Shedeur? But no, Emmanuel Acho, king of the I'm going to say something ridiculous just so other people talk about me, decided to fire off, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, arguably the worst NFL take I have ever heard in my life. Unfortunately, that means I have no choice but to take him to task. I don't know what it is about Shedeur Sanders, but he seems to bring out the worst in the media. I mean, if you think back to last April's draft, you had all the narratives that NFL teams are passing up on a quarterback who can help them win because they're racist. I mean, just think about the absurdity of that, especially when you consider how many black quarterbacks have gone number one overall in the past 5 years, right? Like, it had nothing to do with that. It was everything to do with the circus around Shedeur, and you're bringing all that to town because what happened? He goes to the Browns in the 5th round, and what did the Browns deal with all year? People saying that they're sabotaging Shedeur. They don't want him to succeed. That Kevin Stefanski, an NFL head coach whose entire livelihood revolves around winning games in the NFL, is purposefully losing games to prove a point to Shedeur Sanders. I mean, it's absurd. But the Browns end up firing Stefanski. They hire Todd Monken. And Emmanuel Acho, I honestly don't even know how to set this up. Just play it.
Any expectation for Shedeur Sanders under Todd Monken, I believe, will lead to disappointment. There is nothing about Todd Monken as a head coach that should get you excited. As an offensive coordinator, you could say Lamar Jackson had an MVP season under Todd Monken. As an offensive coordinator, Lamar Jackson had 41 touchdowns and 4 interceptions under Todd Monken. As an offensive coordinator, you can make arguments under Todd Monken. Stetson Bennett won 2 national championships at Georgia under Todd Monken. But as a head coach, no. Nothing about Todd Monken as a head man gets me excited. I need to see who the offensive coordinator is going to be. That's what I need to see. But what I don't yet see, T, is like, how is Todd Monken going to command that locker room, command that group of men? And also, if I'm Shedeur or anybody in that locker room, why am I listening to Todd Monken? What have you won on an NFL level as a head coach? You're not even a head coach on an NFL level. So I don't even have expectations for Shedeur under Todd Monken because I believe any expectations I would have, he would not meet. Because why am I excited about it, T?
I told you, right? Like, it's even worse than you think it's going to be when you hear it. This man just said that Shedeur Sanders, coming off a 7-touchdown, 10-interception, 7-game run as the starting quarterback, where he at times looked awful, should not listen to his head coach. In fact, he said, why should Shedeur or anyone in that locker room listen to Todd Monken? Well, because he's the head coach. That's kind of how it works. You might not like that. I might not like the Todd Monken hire. I might have thought there were better candidates available, but it doesn't matter. At this point, he's the head coach. Acho, a former player, sitting up on a podcast, advising a young quarterback to ignore his head coach because he hasn't been a head coach in the NFL before, is absurd. What is Acho's point? That no one who has never coached in the NFL as a head coach should ever get a head coaching job? Well, that's interesting because Acho's the same guy that complains about black coaches not getting enough opportunities to be head coaches in the NFL. Well, there are only a handful of black men who have experience coaching the NFL. But according to Acho's logic, you have to have head coaching experience to be a head coach, which means the number of black head coaches in the NFL will never grow. Because why? How could it? How can you hire a guy that doesn't have head coaching experience? I mean, do you see how ridiculous that argument is? And would he be making the same argument if the Browns had hired a black coordinator instead of a white one? And I love how he glosses over Monken's resume, too, in the beginning. He's like, well, yeah, Lamar Jackson may have won an MVP. He might have been a 2-time All-Pro, but, like, why does that excite Shedeur Sanders? Like, why should a young quarterback be excited to work with a guy who's had an MVP quarterback? Who, by the way, he said he's accomplished nothing in the NFL. The Ravens won a couple of playoff games, despite Lamar not playing well in the playoffs. They have a couple of playoff wins during Monken's tenure as their head coach. Oh, yeah, and he won 2 national championships with Stetson Bennett at quarterback at Georgia. that gets me a little bit excited, at least if I'm a quarterback, if I'm Shedeur Sanders. I mean, here's a guy who has brought out quite a lot in the quarterbacks he's had a chance to coach. And by the way, the argument that Monken, what has he won, so why should I listen to this guy? I got a question for you, Emmanuel. What the hell has Shedeur Sanders won? A couple of state titles in high school? That's right. Shedeur hasn't won anything. Nothing. Since high school. His biggest accomplishment in college was a 2022 SWAC championship, which, by the way, he then lost in the Celebration Bowl. Colorado, he went 13-12. I mean, what has Shedeur Sanders won? He started 7 games last year. He got a invite to the Pro Bowl because he's a celebrity, not because he played well or because he deserved it based on merit. I don't even understand the argument. Todd Monken's resume isn't good enough for Emmanuel Acho to believe that Shedeur Sanders should even listen to the guy, but Shedeur's resume is good enough that he gets to dictate who he should listen to? I mean, I can imagine if you were making this argument and say Monken had accepted the head coaching job with the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers was going to be the quarterback, I could understand making this argument. Why should Aaron Rodgers, guy who's been in the league for 20 years, who's won a Super Bowl, why should he listen to Todd Monken? I can see that argument, honestly. But to make that argument about a second-year quarterback who started 7 games, who was in many cases terrible, to make the case that that guy who really has won nothing in the last 6 years of his football career, to make the argument that that guy doesn't need to listen to a head coach because he's never been a head coach before, it's almost, sometimes I hate my job. And I'll tell you why. Because sometimes I hear something like that and I go, you know what? I'm not even going to dignify that with a response. Like, Emmanuel Acho is clearly trying to get people like me to talk about him. That is the entire goal of making outlandish statements like this. And it works. Here we are. Here I am talking about the guy. Talking about damn Emmanuel Acho. It works. But sometimes I just wish I could say, I'm not going to respond to this because it's silly. It's absurd. It's performance art. He's doing it on purpose. He wants this. He wants the reaction. And I'm giving it to him. And he wasn't the only one. Listen to what Skip Bayless said.
I'm not saying Todd Monken was a bad hire for the Cleveland Browns or for Shedeur Sanders. I'm just saying that for me, he's a disappointing hire because I'd gotten my heart set on a young coach you may not have heard of until very lately, Nate Scheelhaase. Nate Scheelhaase is only 35 years of age, but Nate Scheelhaase is the only young black offensive coach I know in the head coaching pipeline in the National Football League. It's the only one I know, which horrifies me.
That might actually be the worst take I've ever heard. Skip Bayless is advocating that the Browns should have hired a black head coach because their quarterback's black. First of all, that's racist. Second of all, the guy he suggests, Nate Scheelhaase, who might be a great coach, he's young, he doesn't have a ton of experience, he's never even been an offensive coordinator. And this is why I actually wish the Browns had hired this guy. And I'll tell you why. Because what would Emmanuel Acho say? He just said Todd Monken's resume wasn't good enough. What have you done in the NFL, is what he said about Todd Monken. What have you done as a head coach? Scheelhaase hasn't even been an offensive coordinator. He is an offensive assistant. He coaches quarterbacks. You want to talk about a guy who definitely did not have the resume or the experience to be a head coach, at least in this cycle. He probably will at some point, but in this cycle, he definitely didn't have the experience. But would Emmanuel Acho have made the same argument? Would he have said, if they hired Scheelhaase, a black coach with no head coaching experience in the NFL, no coordinator experience in the NFL, what if they had hired that guy? Would that be okay for Emmanuel Acho? It's not okay for Skip Bayless, who apparently doesn't care about credentials anymore. I don't know what happened to Skip Bayless. At one point, he was at least moderately entertaining, and now I think it's his fault. I think it's Bayless's fault. I think he's the one that created this environment where you just say things to get attention. And Acho's just following his playbook. It is ironic, though, that if I told you I was going to play a terrible take by Emmanuel Acho and a terrible take by Skip Bayless about the Browns hiring a new head coach and how those two guys might react to them hiring a white head coach for their black quarterback, I mean, it must have been 10,000 to 1 that the guy who would cry racism would be Skip Bayless. Acho passed up a golden opportunity to play the race card, and he loves to do that. Skip Bayless plays the race card. Acho plays the experience card. Both of their arguments are at war with each other because Bayless is arguing for a guy with far less experience than Monken. Acho is arguing for only a head coach. I can't even keep it straight. It's sad, honestly, that sports media has devolved to this point. We're in a position where you just have to say crazy stuff to get noticed. And that's too bad. I enjoy nuanced debate. I enjoy narratives as much as the next person, but I don't like when people create them out of thin air. You have to let the story tell itself. And here's two guys desperate to control their own narrative. But we don't do that here. We let the story tell itself. Let's see how Todd Monken does. Let's see how Shedeur does. He was a rookie last year. Rookies often improve, especially quarterbacks in year 2, year 3, as they get more experience. Let's see what happens before we go making crazy statements. I know that's not going to draw a ton of clicks. It's not going to drive up those likes and those comments and those subscribers, but it's the truth. And at the end of the day, that's all I can do. All I can do is tell you the truth.